The city of Chicago wakes up the same way every morning. Cars honking, people rushing, coffee cups in hand. Everyone has somewhere to be. Everyone has someone waiting for them. But in the shadow of a small church on the corner of Madison Street, an old man opens his eyes to another day that nobody asked for. His name was Harold Finch. He was 98 years old, and for the past 12 years, he had been completely invisible. Not invisible like a ghost, invisible like the cracks in the sidewalk, invisible like the pigeons nobody feeds, invisible like the wind that blows through the city and touches everyone but belongs to no one. That was Harold, a man who had lived almost a full century, and yet most days, not a single person looked him in the eye. He slept under the stone awning of St. Michael's Church. It was not comfortable. The ground was hard and cold, especially in winter. But the priest never chased him away. Sometimes, late at night, the priest would leave a folded blanket by the door. He never said anything. He just left it there, and Harold would take it without a word. That was the closest thing to kindness he had known in years. Every morning, Harold would fold that blanket carefully, tuck it into his old duffel bag, and begin his slow walk through the city. His legs were not what they used to be. His back bent forward like a question mark. His shoes had holes in them, and his coat was too thin for the Chicago wind. But still, he walked. Because, what else was there to do? He had a routine. First, he would stop by the back door of a small diner called Tony's. The owner, a big man with a loud laugh and kind eyes, always saved the day-old bread for him. He never made Harold feel like a beggar. He would just hand him the bag and say, "Take care of yourself, old-timer." And Harold would nod and walk away. He never stayed long. He did not want to be a burden. After that, Harold would find a bench somewhere and sit for hours, sometimes in the park, sometimes near the river. He liked to watch the water. It reminded him of something. He could not always remember what. His memory was not what it used to be. Some days, he could remember every detail of his childhood. Other days, he forgot what year it was. But the river always made him feel calm, like the world was still turning, even if he was no longer part of it. People walked past him all day long. Young people with headphones in their ears, mothers pushing strollers, businessmen shouting into their phones. None of them saw him, or maybe they did see him, but they chose to look away. Harold did not blame them. He understood. A homeless old man is not something people want to think about. It reminds them that life can break anyone. It reminds them that one day, they too might be forgotten, but Harold had not always been this way. There was a time, many decades ago, when people knew his name, when they paid money to sit in grand halls and listen to him, when newspapers wrote about him, when women wore their finest dresses just to hear him play. Yes, play. Because Harold Finch had once been a pianist, not just any pianist, one of the greatest of his generation. He did not think about those days very often. It hurt too much. But sometimes, late at night, when the city was quiet and the stars were out, the memories would come back. He would close his eyes and hear the music again. Chopin, Beethoven, Debussy. The notes would float through his mind like old friends visiting from far away. And for a few minutes, he was not a homeless man sleeping on cold stone. He was a young boy in a small apartment, sitting at a piano his mother had saved 3 years to buy. He was a teenager performing at his first concert, hands shaking, heart pounding. He was a man in a tuxedo, standing on the stage of Carnegie Hall, the most famous concert hall in the world. Listening to the applause of 2,000 people, those days felt like a dream now, like they had happened to someone else. Harold's mother had discovered his gift when he was only 4 years old. She had taken him to visit a neighbor who owned a piano, and little Harold had climbed onto the bench and started pressing the keys. But he was not just pressing them randomly, he was playing a melody, a song he had heard on the radio that morning. Note for note. Perfect. The neighbor had stared at him with wide eyes. His mother had burst into tears. From that moment on, everything changed. She worked 2 jobs to pay for his lessons. She walked him to his teacher's house every Saturday, even in the snow. She told him every single day that he was special, that he had a gift from God, that he was meant for great things. And Harold believed her. How could he not? She was his mother. By the time he was 12, he was winning competitions. By 15, he was performing with orchestras. By 19, he stood on the stage of Carnegie Hall for the first time, the youngest pianist to ever headline a solo concert there. The newspapers called him a genius, a prodigy, the next great American pianist. And for a while, life was everything he had dreamed of. He traveled the world. He played in London, Paris, Vienna, Tokyo. He met presidents and kings. He fell in love with a beautiful woman named Catherine, and they got married in a small church in the countryside. They had a daughter, a little girl with her mother's eyes and her father's love for music. Harold would sit at the piano and play lullabies for her every night. She would fall asleep in his arms, and he would think to himself, "This is it. This is happiness." But life has a way of taking things away, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. The accident happened on a rainy night in October of 1965. Harold was not in the car. He was at home, preparing for a concert. Catherine and their daughter were driving back from visiting her parents. A truck ran a red light. The police officer who came to Harold's door could barely get the words out. Harold did not play the piano for 3 months after that. And when he finally sat down at the bench again, something was different. His right hand would not move the way it used to. The doctors said it was nerve damage from the shock. The grief had broken something inside him. Not just his heart. His hands. He tried to keep playing. He tried for years. But the music that once flowed through him like water now came out broken and wrong. The critics noticed. The audiences noticed. And one by one, the invitations stopped coming. By 1975, Harold Finch had disappeared from the music world completely. He sold his piano. He sold his house. He drifted from city to city, job to job, year to year. He never remarried. He never played again. He just faded. And now, here he was, 98 years old, sleeping under a church awning, eating day-old bread, watching the river flow by, and wondering if anyone in the world even remembered that he existed. The answer, he was sure, was no. But the universe has a funny way of proving us wrong. Sometimes, when we think our story is over, it is only just beginning. And for Harold Finch, the next chapter was about to start in the most unexpected place: a hotel lobby, a piano, and a moment that would change everything. February in Chicago is not kind to anyone, but it is especially cruel to those who have no walls to hide behind. The wind cuts through the streets like a knife. The snow piles up on sidewalks and turns to gray slush. And the cold, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there, makes every single day feel like a fight for survival. Harold Finch had survived many winters on the streets. 12 of them, to be exact. He knew the tricks. He knew which subway stations let you sit for a while before someone asked you to leave. He knew which buildings had heating vents that blew warm air onto the sidewalk. He knew which churches opened their doors on the coldest nights and offered a cot and a bowl of soup. But this February was different. This February was the coldest one he could remember, and at 98 years old, his body was tired of fighting. That afternoon, the temperature dropped to 15 degrees below zero. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked Harold off his feet. He had been walking for hours, trying to find somewhere warm, but every place he tried was either full or closed. His fingers were numb, his lips were cracked, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Fear, not fear of dying. Harold had made peace with death a long time ago. He had lived a full life, even if the last part of it had been lonely. No. What scared him was the thought of dying alone, on a sidewalk, in the cold, with nobody knowing and nobody caring. That was the thing about being invisible. You could disappear, and the world would just keep moving without you. He needed to get inside, anywhere, just for a few minutes. That was when he saw the Grandview Hotel. It was one of those fancy places, the kind with doormen in long coats and golden lights in every window. The kind where a single night cost more than Harold had seen in 10 years. He had walked past it 100 times before, but he had never gone inside. Places like that were not for people like him. He knew that. Everyone knew that. But today, he was too cold to care. He pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the lobby. The warmth hit him like a wave. It was so sudden, so wonderful, that he almost cried. He stood there for a moment, just breathing, letting the heat sink into his frozen skin. The lobby was enormous. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, soft music playing from somewhere. People in expensive clothes walked past him, laughing and chatting, not even noticing the old man in the torn coat standing by the door. Harold knew he did not belong here. He knew someone would ask him to leave any second now. But he could not move. His legs were too tired. His body was too cold, so he just stood there, waiting for the inevitable. A young man in a bellhop uniform noticed him first. He was maybe 22 or 23, with a kind face and curious eyes. He looked at Harold for a long moment, taking in the ragged clothes, the worn shoes, the trembling hands. Harold braced himself for the usual words. "Sir, you need to leave. Sir, this is private property. Sir, I am going to have to call security." But the young man did not say any of those things. Instead, he looked around to make sure no one was watching, and then he gave Harold a small nod. A nod that said, "I see you. I know you are cold. Stay as long as you need." Then he turned and walked away, pretending he had never seen him at all. Harold felt a lump form in his throat. Such a small thing. Such a simple act of kindness. But to a man who had been invisible for 12 years, it meant everything. He found a corner near a large potted plant and sat down on the floor, trying to make himself as small as possible. He did not want to cause trouble. He just wanted to warm up for a few minutes, and then leave. That was all, just a few minutes. But then he saw it. In the center of the lobby, surrounded by velvet ropes, sat a piano. A Steinway grand piano. Black and shining, like a sleeping panther. It was clearly just for decoration, a beautiful object for guests to admire as they walked past. Nobody was meant to play it. That was obvious from the ropes around it. Harold stared at it. He could not look away. It had been decades since he had touched a piano. Decades since he had even allowed himself to be near one. After the accident, after he lost Catherine and his daughter, after his hands stopped working the way they should, he had promised himself he would never play again. The music was part of his old life, the life that had been taken from him, and he could not bear to be reminded of what he had lost. But something about this piano called to him. Maybe it was the cold that had weakened his defenses. Maybe it was the kindness of the young bellhop that had stirred something inside him. Maybe it was simply the fact that he was 98 years old, and he did not know how many days he had left. Whatever the reason, Harold felt a pull he had not felt in 60 years. He stood up slowly. His knees ached. His back protested. But he kept moving. One step at a time. A woman in a fur coat glanced at him and wrinkled her nose. A businessman stepped aside to avoid touching him. But Harold did not notice. His eyes were fixed on the piano, on the keys, on the bench. When he reached the velvet rope, he stopped. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. What was he doing? He was a homeless man, in a luxury hotel. If he touched that piano, they would throw him out. They might even call the police. This was crazy. This was foolish. He should turn around and leave right now. But his hands had other ideas. Before he knew what he was doing, he ducked under the rope. He walked to the bench. He sat down. The leather was cool and smooth beneath him. The keys stretched out in front of him, white and black, like an old friend waiting to say hello. For a long moment, Harold just sat there. He did not move. He did not breathe. He just looked at the keys and remembered. He remembered his mother's face when she first heard him play. He remembered Catherine's smile on their wedding day. He remembered his daughter's tiny hand reaching for the keys, trying to copy her father. He remembered Carnegie Hall, the applause, the music, the joy, and then, without thinking, he placed his fingers on the keys. The first note rang out across the lobby. Clear, pure, perfect. And then the second note, and the third, and suddenly, Harold Finch was playing again. He did not choose the piece. His hands chose it for him. Chopin's Ballade. No. 1-inch G minor. The same piece he had played at Carnegie Hall 70 years ago. On the greatest night of his life, the notes flowed out of him like water from a broken dam. All the pain, all the grief, all the years of silence. It all poured through his fingers and into the music. He did not notice the lobby going quiet. He did not notice the guests stopping in their tracks. He did not notice the young bellhop pulling out his phone and pressing record. He did not notice the tears rolling down his own cheeks. All he knew was the music. All he felt was the music. For the first time in 60 years, Harold Finch was exactly where he was meant to be, and everything was about to change. The first notes floated through the lobby like a whisper, soft, gentle, almost like the piano was waking up from a long sleep. At first, nobody paid attention. People kept walking, phones kept ringing, conversations kept going. It was just background noise. Just another sound in a busy hotel. But then something shifted. The music grew stronger. The notes became clearer. And one by one, people began to stop. A woman in high heels paused mid-step. A man in a business suit lowered his phone. A little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed at the old man sitting at the piano. Within 30 seconds, the entire lobby had gone silent. Harold did not notice any of this. His eyes were closed. His body swayed gently with the rhythm. His fingers moved across the keys like they had a mind of their own. Chopin's Ballade. No one. The piece he had played 1,000 times before. The piece that had made him famous. The piece that had broken his heart. He had not touched a piano in 60 years. 60 years of silence. 60 years of pretending the music did not exist. 60 years of telling himself that part of his life was over. But now, sitting on this bench in this hotel lobby, it all came rushing back. Every note, every phrase, every emotion. It was like meeting an old friend after decades apart and realizing that nothing had changed. The connection was still there. It had always been there. Waiting, the young bellhop stood frozen near the front desk. He had seen a lot of things in his 2 years working at the Grand View. Rich people, famous people, strange people, but he had never seen anything like this. This old homeless man, this person everyone had ignored, was creating the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Without thinking, he pulled out his phone and started recording. He did not know why. He just felt like this moment needed to be saved. Near the elevator, a woman in an expensive dress had stopped walking. She was a music professor at a university downtown. She had spent her entire life studying piano. She had heard the greatest pianists in the world perform in the greatest concert halls. And yet, standing here in a hotel lobby, listening to a man in torn clothes play a decorative piano, she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt moved, truly, deeply moved. Tears began to form in her eyes, and she did not bother to wipe them away. An older gentleman sitting in a leather chair put down his newspaper. He did not know much about classical music. He was a retired construction worker who had spent his life building things with his hands, but he knew emotion when he heard it, and this music was full of it. Pain, loss, love, hope. It was all there, woven into every note. He thought about his wife, who had passed away 3 years ago. He thought about the things he never got to say to her, and for the first time since her funeral, he let himself cry. A young couple on their honeymoon stood near the window, holding hands. They had come to Chicago for a romantic weekend. They had planned dinners and shows and tours, but nothing they had experienced so far compared to this moment. This unexpected, unplanned, beautiful moment. The bride leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, and he kissed her forehead. Neither of them said a word. They did not need to. The little girl who had first noticed Harold was now standing as close to the piano as her mother would allow. She was maybe 6 or 7 years old. With wide eyes and curly hair, she had never heard music like this before. At home, she listened to pop songs and cartoon themes. But this was different. This music made her feel things she did not have words for. She looked up at the old man and wondered who he was. Where did he come from? Why was he so sad? And how could someone so sad make something so beautiful? Harold played on. The piece moved through its movements, building and falling, whispering and roaring. His hands, the same hands that doctors had said were damaged beyond repair, flew across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible. It was as if the music itself was healing him, as if every note was stitching together the broken pieces of his heart. He thought about Catherine, the way she used to sit in the front row at every concert, her eyes shining with pride, the way she would wait for him backstage with a single red rose, the way she would say, "You were wonderful, my love," even when he felt like he had made 100 mistakes. He missed her so much. Even after all these years, the missing had not gotten smaller. It had just become part of him. He thought about his daughter, the way she would run to him when he came home from touring, the way she would climb onto his lap and demand that he play her favorite song, the way she would fall asleep with her head on his chest, completely trusting, completely safe. She would have been in her 60s now if she had lived. She might have had children of her own, grandchildren, a whole life that Harold would never get to see. The music swelled. The notes climbed higher and higher. Harold's fingers moved faster and faster. And then, suddenly, everything slowed down. The final passage began. Soft, tender, like a goodbye. The last note hung in the air for what felt like an eternity, pure and clear and heartbreaking. And then it faded, and then there was silence. Harold opened his eyes. For a moment, he did not know where he was. He had been so lost in the music, so deep inside his memories, that he had forgotten about the hotel, the lobby, the people. But now, as his vision cleared, he saw them, dozens of faces, all staring at him, all crying. He looked around, confused. Why were they crying? Why were they all looking at him? And then it hit him. They had heard. They had all heard. For the first time in 60 years, someone had heard him play. The silence lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. And then it broke. The applause started slowly. 1 person, then 2, then 10, then everyone. The entire lobby erupted in thunderous applause. People were clapping and cheering and wiping their eyes. The woman in the expensive dress was openly sobbing. The retired construction worker was on his feet. The little girl was jumping up and down, clapping her tiny hands together. Harold sat there, stunned. He did not know what to do. He did not know what to say. He had not expected this. He had not expected anything. He had just wanted to play. Just one more time, just to remember what it felt like. The young bellhop lowered his phone. He had recorded the entire thing. 7 minutes and 43 seconds of the most incredible piano playing he had ever witnessed. He looked at the video on his screen, then looked at the old man sitting at the piano. He had to share this. The world needed to see this. But first, he walked over to Harold. He knelt down beside the bench so they were at eye level. And he said something that Harold would never forget. "Sir, that was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. Thank you." Harold looked at the young man. His eyes were wet. His voice was shaky. But for the first time in 12 years, he did not feel invisible. "Thank you," Harold whispered back. "Thank you for letting me stay." That night, the young bellhop uploaded the video to the internet. He did not expect much. Maybe a few hundred views. Maybe a few nice comments. He had no idea that by morning, the video would have 4 million views. He had no idea that journalists from around the world would start asking questions. He had no idea that the old homeless man in the video was about to become the most talked about person on the planet. And he had no idea that Harold Finch's story was only just beginning. The young bellhop woke up the next morning to a phone that would not stop buzzing. Notifications filled his screen. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. He rubbed his eyes and looked at the numbers, certain he was still dreaming. The video he had uploaded the night before, the one of the old man playing piano in the hotel lobby, had been viewed over 4 million times. 4 million. In less than 12 hours, he sat up in bed and scrolled through the comments. People from all over the world were writing in. Some in English, some in Spanish, some in languages he did not recognize. But the message was the same everywhere. Who is this man? Where did he learn to play like that? This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I am crying. Please find him. Please help him. The bellhop had not shared Harold's name in the video. He did not even know Harold's name at the time. He had simply written, "Homeless man walks into hotel and plays piano. What happens next will break your heart." He never imagined it would travel this far. By noon, the video had 8 million views. By evening, it had crossed 15 million. News stations started picking it up. First, the local Chicago channels, then the national networks, then international outlets. The story of the mysterious homeless pianist was spreading like wildfire, and everyone wanted to know the truth. Who was he? Where did he come from? And how could a man living on the streets play Chopin like a master? It did not take long for the journalists to find answers. A music critic in New York was the first to make the connection. He had been watching the viral video like everyone else. But something about the old man's technique seemed familiar. The way he held his wrists, the way he attacked certain passages, the way he breathed with the music. It reminded him of recordings he had studied in graduate school. Recordings from the 1,950 seconds and 1,960 seconds. Recordings of a young American pianist who had taken the classical world by storm. He dug through his archives. He pulled out old concert programs and faded newspaper clippings. And then he found it. A photograph from 1,958. A young man in a tuxedo, standing on the stage of Carnegie Hall, taking a bow. The caption read, "Harold Finch, 19, becomes youngest pianist to headline solo concert at Carnegie Hall." The critic looked at the photograph. Then he looked at the video. The face was older. The hair was gray. The body was bent and worn, but the eyes were the same. And the hands. Those hands that moved across the keys like they were born to do nothing else. It was him. The homeless man in the video was Harold Finch, one of the greatest pianists of the 20th century. The news broke within hours. Headlines exploded across the internet. Legendary pianist found homeless after 60 years. The tragic fall of Harold Finch. From Carnegie Hall to the streets, the heartbreaking story of a musical genius. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. How had a man who once played for presidents and kings ended up sleeping under a church awning in Chicago? Journalists began digging deeper. They found old interviews, old reviews, old recordings. They pieced together the story of a child prodigy from a poor family who had risen to the top of the music world through sheer talent and determination. They found photos of him performing in Paris, London, Vienna. They found clips of him shaking hands with world leaders. They found articles praising him as the most gifted American pianist of his generation. And then they found the other articles, the ones from October 1965. The car accident, the rain-slicked road, the truck that ran the red light, the wife and daughter who did not survive, the pianist who was left behind, broken in ways that no doctor could fix. One journalist tracked down a retired music teacher who had known Harold in the years after the accident. The teacher, now in his 80s, spoke with a heavy heart. He remembered Harold trying to play again. He remembered the frustration, the tears, the rage. Harold's right hand had been affected by the trauma. Not physically, but neurologically. The grief had done something to his brain, to his nerves, to his connection with the instrument. The music that once flowed so easily now came out fractured and wrong. He tried for years, the old teacher said, but it was never the same. And eventually, he just gave up. He stopped playing. He stopped performing. He stopped everything. It was like watching a light go out. The world learned about Harold's slow disappearance from public life, how he had sold his piano, how he had moved from city to city, taking odd jobs, never staying anywhere for long, how he had lost touch with everyone who had ever known him, how, somewhere along the way, he had ended up on the streets, alone, forgotten, invisible. The story broke people's hearts. Millions of them. Comments poured in from every corner of the globe. People who had never heard of Harold Finch before were now weeping over his tragedy. People who had grown up listening to his recordings were stunned to learn he was still alive. Musicians, celebrities, ordinary people, all of them united by a single feeling. This man deserved better. This man deserved to be seen. A famous talk show host mentioned Harold's story on her program, her voice cracking as she spoke. "This is a man who gave the world so much beauty," she said, "and the world forgot him. We cannot let that be the end of his story." A retired orchestra conductor in Boston watched the video 17 times in one day. He had performed with Harold in 1962. He remembered a young man full of fire and passion, a man who played like his life depended on it. Seeing what had become of him was almost too much to bear. The conductor picked up his phone and started making calls. A woman in London who ran a charity for homeless musicians saw the video and immediately began organizing a fundraiser. She did not know Harold personally. She had never even been to Chicago. But she knew talent when she heard it. And she knew pain when she saw it. This man needed help. And she was going to make sure he got it. Back in Chicago, Harold had no idea any of this was happening. He had left the hotel that night and returned to his usual spot under the church awning. He had slept better than he had in years, his heart still full from the experience of playing again. But he did not have a phone. He did not have a television. He did not know that his face was being broadcast around the world. He did not know that millions of people were saying his name. The next morning, he walked to Tony's diner for his usual bread. But when he got there, something was different. The owner was standing outside, waiting for him. And he was not alone. There were people with cameras, people with microphones, people shouting questions. "Mr. Finch, Mr. Finch, how does it feel to be famous again? Mr. Finch, what happened to you after the accident? Mr. Finch, do you have any message for your fans around the world?" Harold stood there, frozen. He did not understand. Famous? Fans? What were they talking about? He looked at the diner owner. Confusion written all over his face. The owner walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. His eyes were wet. His voice was gentle. "Harold," he said, "the whole world is looking for you. They saw you play. They know who you are. And they want to help." Harold blinked. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For 60 years, he had believed his story was over. He had believed he had nothing left to give. He had believed he would die alone and forgotten, just another nameless body on the streets. But he was wrong. His story was not over. It was only just beginning. And the next chapter was going to be the most unexpected one of all. The days that followed were a blur. Harold could barely keep up with everything that was happening. One moment, he was a homeless man standing outside a diner, confused and overwhelmed. The next moment, he was sitting in a warm hotel room, surrounded by people who wanted to help him. It felt like a dream, the kind of dream you are afraid to believe in because you know you will have to wake up eventually. But this was not a dream. This was real. And it was only the beginning. A crowdfunding campaign had been started by someone Harold had never met, a young woman in California who had seen his video and could not stop crying. She had set a goal of $50,000 to help him get back on his feet. Within 24 hours, the campaign had raised $200,000. Within a week, it had crossed $2 million. $2 million. For him, a man who had been eating day-old bread and sleeping on cold stone just days before. Harold did not know what to do with this information. He had never been good with money, even when he had it. And now, strangers from all over the world were giving him more than he could ever spend. He felt grateful. He felt confused. He felt unworthy. Why were they doing this? He was just an old man who had played a piano. He was not a hero. He was not special. He had failed at life in almost every way possible. But the world did not see it that way. The world saw a man who had lost everything and still found a way to create beauty. The world saw a man who had been forgotten but refused to let his gift die. The world saw hope, and in a time when hope felt hard to find, that meant everything. Letters began arriving. Thousands of them. From every corner of the planet. Children drew him pictures. Teenagers wrote him poems. Adults shared their own stories of loss and survival. One letter came from a man in Germany who had heard Harold play in Berlin in 1961. He wrote about how that concert had changed his life, how it had inspired him to pursue music, how he had never forgotten the young American with the magic hands. He had thought Harold was dead. Learning that he was alive, that he was still playing, filled him with a joy he could not put into words. Another letter came from a nurse in a small town in Oregon. She was 73 years old now, but in 1959, she had been a young woman visiting Paris for the first time. She had wandered into a concert hall one evening and heard a pianist who made her cry. She had never learned his name. But when she saw the viral video, she recognized him instantly. 64 years later, and she still remembered the way his music had made her feel. She wrote to Harold and offered him something unexpected. A room in her home, a place to stay for as long as he needed. She lived alone. She explained. Her husband had passed away years ago. Her children had grown and moved away. She had space. She had time. And she wanted to help. Harold read her letter 3 times. He did not know this woman. He had never met her. And yet, her words touched something deep inside him. She was not offering him charity. She was offering him something more. A home. A family. A second chance. He accepted. The day Harold moved into her small house in Oregon was quiet and simple. No cameras, no journalists, just an old man with a duffel bag and an old woman with a warm smile. She showed him to his room, a cozy space with a window that looked out over a garden. There was a bed with clean sheets, a dresser for his clothes, and in the corner, a small upright piano that she had bought just for him. Harold stood in the doorway and stared at it for a long time. He did not cry. He had done enough crying in the past few weeks. But he felt something shift inside him, something that had been broken for 60 years, finally beginning to heal. The weeks that followed were peaceful. Harold spent his mornings sitting by the window, watching the birds in the garden. He spent his afternoons at the piano, playing for no one but himself. And he spent his evenings talking with the woman who had opened her home to him. They shared stories. They shared silences. They shared the kind of companionship that only 2 people who have known great loss can understand. But the world had not forgotten Harold Finch. And it had one more surprise in store for him. A letter arrived from New York. From Carnegie Hall. The same stage where Harold had made his debut 70 years ago. They wanted him to perform again. A special concert, a celebration of his life and his music, sold out in advance. 2,000 people waiting to hear him play. Harold read the letter and set it down on the table. His hands were shaking. Carnegie Hall. The place where everything had started. The place where he had become somebody. Could he really go back? Could he really stand on that stage again, after everything that had happened? He thought about saying no. He thought about staying in Oregon, living out his remaining days in peace and quiet. That would be enough. That would be more than he ever expected. But then he thought about his mother, the woman who had worked 2 jobs to pay for his lessons, the woman who had believed in him when no one else did. He thought about what she would say if she could see him now. And he knew, without a doubt, that she would tell him to go. She would tell him to play. She would tell him that his story was not finished yet. So he said yes. The night of the concert was cold and clear. Snow was falling gently over New York City, covering the streets in white. Harold stood backstage, dressed in a tuxedo for the first time in 60 years. His heart was pounding. His hands were trembling. He was 98 years old, and he was terrified. A stagehand came to tell him it was time. Harold took a deep breath. He thought about Catherine. He thought about his daughter. He thought about all the years of silence and sorrow, and then he walked out onto the stage. The applause hit him like a wave. 2,000 people, on their feet, clapping and cheering before he had even played a single note. He saw tears on their faces. He saw smiles. He saw strangers who had become family simply because they had heard his story and believed in him. He sat down at the piano. The same model of Steinway he had played all those years ago. He placed his fingers on the keys, and he closed his eyes. The music that came out was not perfect. His hands were old. His fingers were stiff. There were moments where he stumbled, where the notes did not come as smoothly as they once did. But none of that mattered, because the feeling was there. The emotion, the heart, the love. He played for Catherine. He played for his daughter. He played for his mother. He played for the young bellhop who had let him stay. He played for the woman in Oregon who had given him a home. He played for every person who had ever felt invisible, forgotten, or lost. When the final note faded, the silence lasted only a heartbeat. And then the audience erupted. The standing ovation went on for nearly 10 minutes. People were crying. People were laughing. People were hugging strangers next to them. Harold sat at the piano, tears streaming down his face. He looked out at the crowd and whispered words that only he could hear. I am home. At 98 years old, Harold Finch had played his final concert. Not as a forgotten man. Not as a tragedy. But as a reminder to the world that it is never too late. That music never truly leaves us. And that sometimes, the most beautiful stories are the ones that almost did not get told. He passed away peacefully 3 months later, in his sleep, in the small house in Oregon. The piano in the corner was still warm from the song he had played that afternoon, and somewhere, on the other side, a woman with kind eyes and a little girl with curious hands were waiting to hear him play again.